Hi guys, and welcome to Calm Night Radio channel. Tonight we step into the uneasy dark of early colonial America, where torchlight flickers across wet docks, chains clink softly over creaking wood, and whole lives are pushed into ledgers as if a person could be reduced to ink. What do you really find when you look past the grand houses and heroic myths of the early 1700s, not the polished story from school books? Certainly. You find hidden rooms of history, crowded with people who worked, grieved, joked, sang, feared, and endured while the world around them pretended not to notice. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and while you are here, comment below with your location and local time. Now, dim the lights, and let yourself drift into the damp salt air of the Atlantic world, where ships arrive heavy with tobacco, sugar, rum, and human sorrow, and where the hidden lives of black Americans begin to emerge from the shadows. You stand near the waterfront of an English colony in the early 1700s, and everything feels damp. The wood beneath your feet is swollen with seawater. Tar sticks to the pilings. The air smells of fish, smoke, mud, sweat, and molasses. Gulls cry overhead with the confidence of creatures who owe rent to no one. Around you, sailors shout, carts rattle, ropes strain, and barrels knock together in a steady, sleepy thunder. It almost sounds ordinary. That is the trick of busy places. They hide cruelty inside routine. You watch a ship settle against the dock after a long crossing. Men move first, then cargo, then the people. No one officially calls cargo while treating them exactly that way. Some come directly from Africa. Others have already been forced through the Caribbean, where survival itself has become a narrow and bitter miracle. By the time they reach the mainland colonies, many have endured weeks or months of sickness, confinement, hunger, terror, and bewilderment. Their bodies arrive before their minds can catch up. Their names may have been ignored, misheard, or deliberately replaced. Their languages meet a wall of strange speech. You can almost feel the dizziness of it. In the British mainland colonies, slavery is no longer a loose or uncertain practice by 1700. It is becoming a legal system with teeth. Colonial lawmakers spend a surprising amount of energy deciding who can be owned, who inherits bondage, who may testify, who may gather, who may travel, and who must remain forever under suspicion. The law is not shy about its purpose. It builds a hard line around race, and then pretends that line was always there. A child born to an enslaved mother usually inherits her status, which means bondage renews itself without fresh explanation. Convenient, really. If you're the kind of person who wants wealth without conscience, you move inland from the port and begin to see how varied this world is. Not every black person in the colonies lives on a giant plantation. Some labour on smaller farms. Some work in towns as domestic servants, dock workers, coopers, blacksmiths, carpenters, ferrymen, cooks, stable hands, or laundresses. In places like South Carolina and Virginia, plantation slavery is expanding fast, especially where rice, indigo, and tobacco promise handsome returns. In northern colonies too, slavery exists in quieter forms, tucked behind merchant houses and workshops, as though smaller numbers somehow made it gentler. It does not. A chain is still a chain, even when hidden under a neat apron. You begin to understand that early black American life is not one single story, it is many. Some people were born in West or Central Africa and carried detailed memories of rivers, crops, markets, kin, music, and religious practice. Some are Creole, shaped by Atlantic crossings and multiple languages. Some know Catholic customs from Iberian or Caribbean worlds. Some know English words already. Some do not. Some arrive as children and grow up learning the habits of a place that has no intention of loving them back. That range matters. It means enslaved community is not built from blankness. They are built from surviving knowledge. Listen closely and you hear more than English on the wind. You hear African languages in fragments, whispered between tasks or murmured in prayer. You hear songs with rhythms unfamiliar to the colonists, though not for long, because colonists borrow what they like while despising who created it. You hear drums in memory, if not always aloud, because many slaveholders distrust them. They understand, sometimes better than they admit, that shared sound can carry shared purpose. Historians still argue over how much musical practice survived openly in different colonies during this period, but no serious observer doubts that rhythm, chant, and call and response continued to shape communal life. You walk past a sale, it happens in daylight, which somehow makes it worse. Buyers inspect bodies with the practical interest of men choosing livestock, though livestock at least are rarely expected to smile. Teeth are checked, arms are pressed, scars are noted, age is guessed, skills raise value. A person who knows rice cultivation, cattle handling, weaving or carpentry may fetch more. That detail is chilling for two reasons. First, it shows how much enslavers depended on African expertise. Second, it shows how easily talent became another excuse for theft. Knowledge did not protect you, it made you profitable. A curious thing about the early 1700s is how often colonists described Africans as uncivilized, while relying on them for highly specialized labor. In the Carolina Low Country, for instance, rice agriculture did not simply spring from European brilliance one lucky afternoon. It drew heavily on the experience of West Africans from rice-growing regions. Planters like to imagine themselves masters of everything, but mud, water, and floodplain cultivation had their own opinions. Many enslaved people understood those landscapes better than the men claiming ownership over them. Whether the planters admitted it was another matter. You follow a narrow road away from the market and into a settlement where labour defines every hour. A woman stoops over a kettle. A man repairs a fence with quick, efficient movements. A boy carries water in buckets that seem too large for his arms. A child watches a baby while adults work. Nothing in this scene looks grand. That too is part of the hidden life. History books sometimes march from law to rebellion to famous names, skipping the daily texture that actually made existence what it was. Yet daily texture is everything. The cracked skin on your hands, the smell of wet wool, the ache in your shoulders, the relief of sitting for 5 minutes on an overturned bucket. That is where life happens. Clothing is usually rough and practical, issued sparingly when it is issued at all. Coarse linen, wool, simple shoes if you're lucky, and sometimes no shoes worth mentioning. In summer, heat presses the cloth against the skin until it feels like a second layer of irritation. In winter, the cold finds every gap. Insects do the rest. The body is never allowed to forget its own discomfort. You can imagine touching the fabric and feeling its stiffness, then seeing how carefully people mend it because replacement is uncertain. Even scraps matter. Food varies, but rarely by generosity. Cornmeal, salt pork, fish, peas, rice in some regions. Perhaps garden produce if a patch of ground is allowed or quietly claimed. In urban settings, people may have access to leftovers from kitchens, though leftovers are a poor substitute for dignity. Still, food is never just food. It becomes memory, improvisation, and quiet resistance. A pot can hold seasoning habits from Africa, local ingredients, and the practical genius of making something nourishing from neglect. One quirky detail slips through the records now and then. Some colonial observers complained that enslaved cooks made meals too flavourful, as though spice itself were a form of insubordination. Imagine being offended by competence. You pass a cabin at evening. Smoke drifts from its roof hole and disappears into blue dusk. Inside, it is crowded and dim. Firelight turns faces amber and shadowed. The smell is a mix of ash, damp boards, cooked grain, and tired bodies. Someone hums. Someone laughs unexpectedly at a joke too quick for you to catch. That laugh matters. It breaks the official story. Enslavers prefer the fantasy that domination reaches everywhere, all the time. It does not. There are inner rooms of feeling they cannot fully enter. Weariness lives there, yes, but so do humour, tenderness, irritation, flirtation, memory, and the small private judgments people make about their oppressors. You suspect those judgments are not flattering. Religion in this world is layered and unsettled. Some colonists believe conversion to Christianity should soften slavery. Others fear that baptism might complicate ownership, though laws usually solve that little moral inconvenience for them. Many enslaved Africans bring spiritual systems with them, including reverence for ancestors, ritual knowledge, sacred objects, and cosmologies that do not vanish simply because a planter frowns. In some places, traditions blend. A prayer may carry Christian words and older meanings at once. A song may sound acceptable to white ears while speaking a deeper language underneath. Scholars continue to debate exactly how these exchanges unfolded in specific colonies, because the evidence is often fragmentary and filtered through hostile witnesses. Even so, the spiritual creativity is unmistakable. You notice that colonial records love counting and hate listening. They list ages, values, punishments, sales, births, deaths, and labour output. Very efficient, very neat. Much less attention goes to what a person feared at midnight or remembered from childhood. Yet now and then a hidden life flashes through. A runaway notice mentions scarification marks. Several languages, remarkable intelligence, a missing front tooth, a talent for rowing, or the likelihood that the fugitive will seek out kin nearby. These notices were meant to capture people, but they accidentally preserve glimpses of character. A person emerges from the text despite the writer's best effort to reduce them to property. In the Chesapeake, in the Carolinas, in northern port towns, Black Americans in 1700 are helping build the physical world around them. They clear land, plant crops, steer boats, load ships, tend animals, cook meals, raise children not their own, repair tools, carry messages, and keep colonial households functioning. The irony is almost comical. In the darkest possible way, a society obsessed with ranking them beneath humanity cannot get through the week without their labour. Remove their work and the whole thing begins to wobble like a bad table. Night settles deeper now. Crickets begin their steady music. Far off, a dog barks. The air cools against your skin at last, and the day's smells fade into wood smoke and wet earth. You sit with the knowledge that the hidden lives of the early slaves were not hidden because they lacked richness. They were hidden because the world built around them preferred profit to truth. Yet truth lingers. It lives in the remembered taste of home, in the grip of a working hand, in a whispered name, in a skill passed quietly onward, in a song breathed low beside a fire. And as you remain here in the dark hush of 1700, listening to the colony creak and murmur around you, you begin to sense the full human presence that official history tried and failed to erase. You wake before the sky decides what colour it wants to be. The air is cool, wet, and faintly metallic, carrying the smell of mud, wood smoke, and leaves darkened by dew. Somewhere close by, a rooster calls with great confidence, as if he personally arranged the sunrise. He did not, of course, but he behaves like management. Around you, people stir from shallow sleep on rough bedding stuffed with whatever could be gathered and spared. A cough breaks the quiet, then another. Boards creak, feet touch the floor. The day begins not with choice, but with summons. In many colonies during the early 1700s, enslaved Black Americans rise in darkness because labour starts as soon as it can be forced from the body. Time is kept not by comfort, but by production, in tobacco regions, in rice country, on farms with mixed crops, and in places where livestock must be managed before dawn. The morning belongs to work long before it belongs to light. You feel the dampness clinging to your skin as you step outside. Grass brushes your ankles. The earth is cold and slick beneath worn shoes, or bare feet if shoes have failed and no replacement has appeared. No one asks whether you slept well. That would suggest a level of concern unsupported by the evidence. You move toward the fields with others, carrying tools that feel heavier than they should at this hour. Hoes, baskets, knives, sickles, wooden pails, whatever the season demands. The tools are plain, but the labour they direct is not. It requires precision, timing, strength, and patience. Popular fantasy likes to imagine enslaved workers as brute force alone, which is convenient for people who do not wish to admit how much skill was stolen. Planting rows evenly, managing drainage, reading soil, handling animals, sorting leaves, tending seedlings, and balancing speed with survival all demand knowledge. A field is not just a field. It is a puzzle of weather, timing, exhaustion, and discipline. As dawn thins the dark, the plantation begins to show itself. Fences emerge first, then sheds, then the large house at a distance. Pale in the weak light, mist hangs low over open ground in the Carolina Low Country, where rice cultivation expands with terrible profit. The landscape can feel half water, half earth, and entirely demanding. Tidal creeks glimmer. Marsh insects whine near your ear. Mud grips the ankles with a stubborn, sucking pull. Rice work is punishing in a distinct way. It often means standing in wet ground, managing embankments, clearing ditches, and enduring mosquitoes so persistent they feel like a second climate. Malaria and other fevers haunt these regions. The land yields wealth to the planter and sickness to almost everyone else. Quite an arrangement. In tobacco colonies such as Virginia and Maryland, the labour has different rhythms but no less strain. Tobacco is famously needy. It must be planted carefully, weeded often, topped, cut, cured, sorted, and packed. The leaves are sticky and pungent. Their scent clings to hands and clothing until the body itself seems cured in smoke and bitterness. Fields stretch out beneath a sky that turns from pearl grey to pink to burning white. By full morning, heat presses down with a flat, relentless hand. Sweat gathers under coarse cloth and along the spine. Backs bend. Fingers work quickly. Overseers or owners watch, counting effort with the sour pleasure of people who mistake control for virtue. You notice how labour shapes sound. At first there is birdsong, insect hum, the scrape of feet, and the soft clink of tools. Then voices enter, instructions barked, names called, warnings muttered under the breath. Sometimes work songs rise, not always loud, not always in full melody, but enough to mark rhythm and share breath. In many enslaved communities, music helps turn isolated motion into collective endurance. A line repeated, a call answered, a phrase stretched over the swing of a hoe can organise movement and ease strain for a moment or two. Historians still debate how openly certain forms of musical expression were permitted in different regions, but few doubt that rhythm stayed deeply woven into work itself. The pace can vary depending on local systems. In some places, especially in parts of South Carolina and Georgia, task labour becomes common. A person is assigned a fixed amount of work for the day, such as hoeing a measured section, pounding rice, or tending a set number of duties. Finish the task, and a little time may remain for personal gardening, mending, fishing, or rest. Though that freedom is always limited and insecure, in many other settings, gang labour dominates. Workers move together under direct supervision from sunrise until dusk, the day parcelled by command instead of completion. The distinction matters. One system steals the whole day openly. The other stills it with a small and calculated illusion of breathing room. You bend to weed between plants, and the work quickly becomes intimate in all the worst ways. Soil works its way under your nails. Ants find your wrists. Sunlight climbs your neck. Your lower back begins its dull complaint before breakfast has become a memory beside you. Someone older works with careful efficiency, wasting no motion. Nearby, a child carries water or gathers fallen branches or frightens birds from the crops. Childhood here is often measured by usefulness. A very small pair of hands can still shell peas, fetch tools, mind infants, scare crows, and learn far too early what the adults already know. There is no magical border where innocence is kindly preserved. There is only labour scaled to size. Meals during the workday are brief and practical. A handful of cornmeal mush, a scrap of salted meat if any is allotted, perhaps cold leftovers carried from the cabin. Water, though in some places the quality is questionable enough to make illness an ordinary companion. You eat quickly because lingering invites notice. Food is fuel, not leisure. Yet even in these scraps there can be technique. A seasoned hand knows how to make the plainest ration taste less bleak, how to stretch grease, mash, greens, or beans into something sustaining, how to guard a little portion for later when the body shakes with afternoon weakness. Culinary skill survives where kindness does not. By noon the plantation smells different. Morning freshness gives way to heated earth, crushed plants, sweat, manure, and standing water. Flies gather with shameless enthusiasm. The sun hardens shadows and turns every task into a negotiation with thirst. Clothing rubs at the shoulders and waist. Hands blister, toughen, split, and toughen again. You can feel the wooden handle of a tool growing slick with sweat, smoothing itself into the shape of repeated use. Touch becomes a record of labour. Calloused palms, stiff knees, salt dried on the skin, a neck sore from looking down, feet swollen inside poor shoes. The body remembers every season, even when no written record does. What also emerges in daylight is hierarchy, measured not only by race and legal status, but by assignment. Field hands often bear the hardest outdoor labour, though some become highly trusted drivers or skilled supervisors within the enslaved workforce, a role that could bring marginal privilege and heavy moral burden at once. Artisans may work at carpentry, blacksmithing, coopering, or brick-making. Enslaved fishermen, boatmen, and herdsmen follow different schedules shaped by tides, roads, and animal habits. Women in the fields labour alongside men in many regions, while also being expected to cook, wash, mend, and care for children when official work ends. The colony never tires of extracting one more task. A strange detail appears in some records from the period. Planters sometimes complain that newly imported Africans resist certain methods or tools, preferring their own agricultural approaches. The complaint is revealing. It suggests not stubbornness in the childish sense, but expertise colliding with arrogance. A person taken from a farming society may know very well how land behaves, which planting methods conserve effort, and what timing suits a crop. Colonial owners often interpret this as defiance, because they dislike being reminded that the people they enslave know things they do not. One can almost hear the offended pride. Imagine owning a man and still resenting that he is smarter than you. Punishment shadows the workday even when no blow falls. It exists in the glance over a shoulder, the sudden hush when a horse approaches, the tension that runs through a line of workers when an overseer notices a dropped pace. A person can be accused of laziness, insolence, theft, or neglect with alarming flexibility. The standard shifts according to mood, weather, debt, crop condition, and the private bitterness of whoever holds power. That uncertainty is itself a weapon. If you never know exactly what will trigger anger, you live braced against it. The nervous system becomes part of the machinery of the plantation. Still, labour does not erase human thought. While hands move, minds travel. People measure one another's moods. They exchange glances, fragments of news, bits of advice on which herb helps fever, whose child is ill, which owner is away, whether a storm is coming, Whether a path through the woods remains passable, information moves through small channels, quiet and persistent. You learn who works steadily, who jokes when they can, who watches too closely, who can be trusted with a whispered truth. Community is built not only at night or in secret gatherings, but right here in the furrows, under the eye of domination, one sentence at a time. By late afternoon, fatigue settles into the muscles like wet sand. Arms feel longer than they should. Even lifting them becomes a negotiation. The light changes from brutal white to richer gold, and for a moment the plantation almost looks beautiful, which feels offensive. Sunlight slips across leaves. Wind moves through cane or corn with a soft rushing sound. Birds dip over the fields. Beauty does not ask permission to appear, even where suffering is systematic. That tension lives in the landscape all the time. The world can smell of jasmine and marsh water while also containing a man with a whip. History has terrible taste in contrasts. When work finally slows, the body does not spring back into personhood like a cheerful machine switching modes. It lingers in labour. Shoulders remain tight. Fingers curl even after the tool is gone. The walk back is slower, quieter, shaped by hunger and the knowledge that chores may still wait. Animals need feeding. Water must be carried. Supper must be prepared. Clothing needs mending. Children need tending. There is no true end to the day, only a change in its demands. As dusk gathers, smoke begins rising from cabins and cook spaces. The evening air cools enough to feel kind. Crickets start their patient chorus. Somewhere, a pot lid rattles. Someone laughs, low and brief, at a remark too dry for the official record. The smell of cornmeal, greens, or fish drifts through the settlement. You sit for a moment on a step, a log, an upturned bucket, and feel the ache of work settle across you like a heavy blanket. Yet even here, in this narrow margin between one day's toil and the next dawn's claim, life remains stubbornly alive. Hands that planted and chopped now stir a pot. A voice that answered commands now hums its own tune. Eyes stung by sweat now lift toward the first stars. The plantation has taken the daylight, but it has not managed to turn human beings into mere extensions of the field. That failure, quiet as it seems, is no small thing. By the time you step toward the main house, the sun has already warmed the clapboard walls and brought the whole yard into motion. Chickens scratch under shrubs with pointless intensity. A dog naps where it should not. The kitchen yard smells of ash, onions, damp linen, and yesterday's grease baked into brick. You hear the steady knock of a knife on wood, the swish of a broom on packed earth, the soft slap of wet cloth against a washboard. This is not field labour, yet no one here would mistake it for ease. Work indoors simply hides its strain behind polished tables and tidy curtains. In the early 1700s, as many enslaved black Americans are assigned to plantation households rather than open fields. That can mean cooking, cleaning, carrying water, tending fires, washing clothes, caring for children, sewing, serving meals, grooming horses, opening gates, emptying chamber pots, and answering bells before they finish ringing. The proximity to white families changes the texture of daily life, but not the central fact of it. You are still owned. You're still watched. You are simply expected to perform your exhaustion in a quieter voice. The big house likes to pretend it runs on elegance. Silver gleams. Floors shine. Candles burn steadily in brass holders. Chairs stand where they should. Soup arrives hot. Beds appear made. The illusion is impressive, in the same way a stage set is impressive if you ignore the frantic people moving behind it. Household slavery is the machinery beneath colonial gentility. Someone scrubs the hallway before dawn. Someone trims wicks. Someone beats rugs. Someone hauls endless buckets of water because taps are a dream for another century. Someone keeps every plate from crusting over with old gravy. Refinement, it turns out, has very tired hands. You enter the kitchen first, because the kitchen is often the true centre of the house. It may stand in a separate building to reduce fire risk and heat, or it may sit close enough for constant traffic between smoke and dining room. The air inside is thick and alive. Fire snaps in the hearth. Steam rises from kettles. Iron pots sweat over coals. The room smells of bread, herbs, meat stock, wood smoke, and damp stone. A cook moves with astonishing coordination, turning, tasting, stirring, and directing others without wasting breath. Domestic labour demands memory as much as muscle. Who prefers what? When guests are expected? Which child refuses porridge? How long the roast needs? Where the nutmeg is hidden from sticky fingers. A household runs on details, and enslaved workers carry most of them in their heads. This closeness creates strange contradictions. Enslaved servants in the house may know the private habits of the family better than distant relatives do. They hear quarrels through doors, see debts pressing on the master's mood, notice which daughter cries after letters arrive, and know which son sneaks drink from the pantry. They witness vanity in curlers, weakness in fever, and hypocrisy in prayer. White families often speak freely in front of enslaved servants as though presents were not personhood. It is an old and ridiculous mistake. People who serve silently are still listening, often very carefully. Women in household service bear especially heavy burdens. An enslaved woman may rise before everyone, light the fires, prepare breakfast, dress children, carry trays, scrub laundry, iron linens, mend tears, and remain on call long after supper. Her labour must appear calm even when it is relentless. She's expected to move quickly, anticipate needs, and make no visible claim on her own fatigue. The touch of this work lingers everywhere. Hands cracked by lye soap, forearms damp from steam, shoulders sore from carrying baskets, finger pricks from mending by poor light. The domestic world is full of textures, and many of them are rough. Laundry alone feels like a private joke played by history on the human back. Water must be carried, heated, and poured. Clothes must be soaked, scrubbed, wrung, boiled, rinsed, hung, dried, folded, and sometimes ironed with heavy tools that hold heat like resentment. Fine linens are especially demanding, because the grander the household wishes to appear, the less it tolerates visible evidence that bodies inhabit it. Stains are treated as moral failings. Mud on a hem becomes a tiny household tragedy. Meanwhile, the person removing it has likely stood for hours in wet shoes. Priorities in colonial society are, let us say, creatively arranged. Children inside the main house complicate matters further. Enslaved nurses, maids, and attendants may feed, wash, rock, and soothe white children from infancy. They become familiar voices in the nursery, steady hands in moments of sickness, and the daily comfort those children expect without understanding the price. Emotional intimacy can grow in such spaces, but it never rests on equal ground. Affection does not undo ownership. A child may cling to the very woman who can be sold away if household finances tighten or tempers flare. That instability hums underneath every tender scene. Men in domestic settings may serve as butlers, valets, coachmen, footmen, stable workers, gardeners, or personal attendants. A coachman knows the roads, the horses, the weather, and the moods of the passengers behind him. A valet keeps clothing brushed, boots cleaned, razors sharp, wigs arranged, and chamber routines in order. Stable work carries its own smell of hay, leather, manure, and horse sweat, and its own bodily rhythm of lifting saddles, currying coats, and rising before everyone to prepare for journeys no one asked whether you wish to take. Skill matters here too. Wealthy households like to imagine service as natural, but polished service is trained, practiced, and demanding. You begin to notice how much household labour depends on performance. Serving a meal is not only about carrying dishes, it is about posture, timing, expression, and silence. You must stand correctly, pour neatly, move without clatter, and somehow remain invisible while holding the room together. The table itself becomes theatre. Candles flicker over silver, glass catches the light, guests discuss trade, politics, crops, and sermons while enslaved hands refill cups and remove plates. The conversation may include lofty remarks about liberty or Christian duty, which is bold talk from a man being served pie by someone he owns. Colonial dining can be unintentionally comic if you allow yourself one dry thought before sleep. For enslaved people in the house, clothing may be slightly better than field issue, though that hardly means comfort. Livery can be given to male servants in prominent households, especially in towns or on formal occasions. Female servants may wear aprons, caps, gowns of coarse but presentable fabric, or garments chosen to reflect the owner's status more than their own needs. The point is display. A neat servant flatters the household, yet garments that look respectable from across a room may chafe badly by noon. Shoes pinch, caps trap heat, sleeves catch soap water. Fine appearance and bodily ease rarely travel together. Food in the household world exists in awkward abundance. Great joints of meat pass through the kitchen. Bread is baked in quantity. Pies cool on ledges. Spices scent sauces. Sugar sweetens preserves and puddings. But access remains controlled. Enslaved cooks and servants may prepare excellent meals without eating much of them, or live on scraps and separate rations while carrying platters heavy with comfort to others. Still, kitchens create opportunities. A spoonful here, a crust there, a careful setting aside of bones, broth, or vegetable peelings can make the difference between hunger and something close to satisfaction. Knowledge of food becomes knowledge of survival. Urban households add yet another layer. In port cities such as Charleston, Annapolis, Philadelphia, New York, or Boston, enslaved domestic workers live in tighter spaces and move within busier public worlds. They may be sent on errands, to market, to fetch water, or to deliver messages. Streets bring noise, gossip, and dangerous possibility. Bells ring, carts rattle over stones, vendors call out fish, apples, candles, cloth. Sailors swagger by smelling of tar and rum. In a town, an enslaved servant may gather bits of news from many mouths in a single afternoon. Information circulates faster there, and so do rumours, plans, and cautionary tales. With proximity comes surveillance, but also opportunity for subtle influence. An enslaved servant can decide how quickly a message is carried, how exactly a sentence is repeated, which household secret is shared with whom, or whether a child's tantrum reaches the master in full detail or softened form. These are small powers, but small powers matter in constrained lives. Resistance does not always announce itself with drama. Sometimes it looks like a delayed errand, a selectively perfect memory, or a face so serene it reveals absolutely nothing. Historians still argue over how often such quiet acts can be detected in the sources, because most records were written by the people being outmaneuvered. Religious life inside the household is often carefully managed. White families may require attendance at prayers, catechism, or church, especially if they believe conversion supports obedience. Yet compulsory religion never stays fully within the script. Enslaved domestic workers hear scripture repeatedly and interpret it through their own needs and wounds. Stories of deliverance, exile, suffering, justice, and divine notice land differently when you are the one pouring tea in a room full of comfortable sinners. A text read for discipline can become, in another mind, a promise. That kind of inner revision leaves almost no paper trail, which only makes it more fascinating. A quirky detail slips through some colonial accounts. Visitors occasionally praise household servants for impeccable manners, then immediately describe them as simple or childlike. The contradiction is almost athletic. To manage a complicated household, remember dozens of tasks, read social cues, handle money at market, soothe children, and maintain formal behaviour requires intelligence. Yet many observers preferred absurd theories to obvious evidence. They could trust black people with the silver, but not with humanity. Remarkable logic. One suspects the silver had fewer unsettling truths to offer. The emotional landscape of the house can be more exhausting than the physical one. Every room has its own rules. In one room, you must speak softly. In another, not at all. In one moment, a mistress confides in you as though you are furniture with ears. In the next, she reminds you sharply of the gulf between you. Praise can feel dangerous because it often means greater expectation. Familiarity can turn without warning into punishment. There is no fully safe posture in a world where your labour is intimate but your personhood denied. Evening in the house brings no instant release. Supper must be served, plates removed, floors swept, lamps trimmed, children undressed, garments brushed, kitchen fires banked. The smells shift from roasted meat and candle wax to cooling ashes and stale wine. At last the room's quiet. Doors close. The family retreats into privacy made possible by the labour of people denied any true privacy themselves. Somewhere in a small chamber, loft, passage corner, or outbuilding room, an enslaved servant finally sits. Feet throb. Hands rest for a moment in an apron or across tired knees. Outside, frogs call from low ground and night air slips through cracks in the boards. In that thin pocket of stillness, beyond the polished surface of colonial gentility, the hidden world of household slavery breathes on, not decorative, not passive, full of skill, tension, wit, endurance, and the deep, watchful intelligence of people who saw far more than the house ever meant to reveal. Night settles over the cabins with a softness the law never learns. The air smells of cooling earth, smoke, damp wood, and the faint sweetness of crushed grass. A baby fusses somewhere nearby, then quiets against a shoulder. Crickets ditch their thin music into the dark. Firelight glows through cracks in rough boards and turns the yard into a patchwork of amber squares. In this hour, after labour has loosened its grip just enough to leave room for breathing, another part of life begins. It is quieter than the fields, less visible than the big house, and far more fragile. Here, love tries to make a home where ownership keeps threatening to kick the door open. For black Americans in the early 1700s, family is not a simple matter of father, mother, child, and a safe roof holding them together. Family is often improvised against force. It is made from marriages not always recognised by law, from children born into danger, from kin sold away, from elders who become grandparents to those not born from their line, from women who mother several children while grieving others no longer near. In a slave society, affection has to be practical as well as tender. You do not merely love people. You learn how to hold them in memory, how to protect them with limited means, how to teach them quickly, and how to keep going when the world behaves as though your deepest bonds are a detail of no commercial importance. Inside the cabin, space is tight. A pallet lies near the wall. A stool leans on one uneven leg. A kettle cools by the hearth. Clothes hang from pegs, or lie folded with care because even coarse fabric takes labour to maintain. Touch matters in such a place. A hand smoothing a child's hair. A blanket adjusted over tired legs. Fingers checking a forehead for fever. A shoulder offered for leaning. Nothing is grand, yet almost everything is intimate. When people live close together, sorrow and comfort have little choice but to share the same air. Marriage among enslaved people in the colonies exists in a world that refuses to secure it. Some couples form unions with the blessing of their community, with spoken promises before witnesses, or through customs carried from Africa and adapted to new conditions. Some receive a planter's approval if the match seems useful or harmless to labour arrangements. A few may encounter Christian ceremonies, though legal recognition is often uncertain or absent. The central fact remains painfully clear. However deep the commitment, an owner can ignore it. A husband can be hired out elsewhere. A wife can be sold. A child can be separated from both. Love is expected to endure without the protection society casually grants to others. You sit near a doorway and watch the small patterns of evening family life. A woman lifts a spoon to a child's mouth and blows gently on the food first. A man returns from some task with a rabbit, a handful of greens, or simply his own tired body and the relief of still being present. Older children keep younger ones from wandering too close to the fire. Someone braids hair with slow, practiced fingers. Someone tells a story in a low voice, not for entertainment alone, but to shape memory and behaviour. Lessons live inside such stories, which paths to avoid, how to speak carefully, how to notice danger, how to hold yourself when insulted, how to pray, how to laugh quietly. These are family teachings too. The birth of a child brings joy and dread at once. Infants are loved, admired, kissed, and named. Yet their future is shadowed from the first breath. In many British colonies, the child of an enslaved woman inherits her status. The rule sounds cold when written down, but in lived experience it is colder still. It means a mother looking at her newborn must feel the sweetness of that tiny face, alongside the knowledge that the law has already prepared a collar for the child's future. The cruelty is almost administrative. One clerk writes a legal principle, and generations wake under it. Women bear the heaviest burden of this system in ways both obvious and hidden. They labour through pregnancy, recover while work continues to press upon them, nurse infants while tending other duties, and carry the unending fear that their children can be punished, used, rented, or sold. Yet women also become the backbone of family continuity. They preserve names, recipes, herbal knowledge, songs, warnings, and lines of kinship that white records barely notice. Many children grow into adulthood knowing their world because a mother, aunt, or grandmother taught them how to read that world without trusting it. Fathers face a different but equally wrenching set of limits. An enslaved man may love his children fiercely while lacking legal authority over them in the eyes of the colony. He may teach, protect, comfort, and provide what little he can through extra work, gardening, fishing, or skilled labour. Yet none of this guarantees he will remain with them. In some places, men live on separate plantations or farms and must steal visits during Sundays, holidays, or rare spare hours. Imagine the strange sorrow of fatherhood measured in miles, permissions, and moonlight. Imagine knowing your child's laugh but not hearing it every morning. Kinship extends beyond the narrow household because it has to. A woman called aunt may be a blood relative, a family friend, or an elder whose care has earned the title. A boy may grow under the watch of several adults because one parent has been sold and another works beyond exhaustion. Elderly people, even when physically worn, often anchor the emotional life of the settlement. They carry memories of Africa, of earlier colonies, of vanished faces, of births and deaths no ledger bothered to link together. Their stories hold people in place when the market keeps trying to scatter them. Naming takes on unusual weight in such circumstances. European names may be imposed, altered, or recorded badly by owners and clerks. Yet within black communities, additional names, remembered names, praise names, or family references can still circulate. A person may answer one way in the yard and be called something warmer, truer, or older by those who know them well. Historians still argue over how often African naming customs survived in direct form across different regions, because written sources are patchy and often distorted, but the persistence of dual identities seems hard to dismiss. Power loves official names. Family keeps the private ones alive. You hear a child asking questions in that endlessly serious way children have. Why does one person live here and another far away? Why must work begin so early? Why can a white child give orders? The answers are never simple, and adults must decide how much truth a child can bear without losing the little sleep available. So families teach in layers. A young child learns obedience in dangerous settings, silence when needed, and the difference between private speech and public speech. An older child learns more, which white people are careless, which are cruel, which can be read, and which cannot. How to move through woods, how to carry a message discreetly, how to notice when anger is brewing in the quarters or the main house. Childhood becomes an apprenticeship in survival. Tenderness survives anyway. It survives in songs sung to babies while stirring cornmeal, in small toys made from scraps of cloth, carved wood, or twisted straw, in teasing between siblings, in the pride of a parent watching a child walk steadily with a bucket or recite a prayer correctly, in the way adults save the best bite of food for someone smaller. Such details rarely enter official documents, but they are essential. A family is not only what suffers together, it is what creates moments of warmth under pressure. There is pain too sharp to soften. Sale is the great terror always waiting at the edge of domestic life. A debt, a death, a move, a dispute, a widow's remarriage, a planter's whim. Any of these can tear people apart in a day. The sound of horses in the yard can change the air instantly. A stranger asking questions about age, health, skills, or children's numbers can turn every face tight with dread. One of the cruelest facts about slavery is that it turns ordinary family milestones into moments of danger. A child growing strong becomes more saleable. A woman praised for good work may be noticed by another owner. A skilled man can be sent elsewhere because skill brings money. Human growth becomes market value. Quite the evil innovation. Some families try to prepare for separation with practical methods. Names of relatives are repeated often so children remember them. Places are described carefully. Distinctive scars, songs, habits, or sayings become markers of identity. Mothers may tell a child who their father is with special urgency if that father does not live nearby. People keep mental maps of kin across plantations, counties, and towns. Memory serves where paper fails. In some rare cases, literate enslaved or free black people help preserve these connections through letters or spoken messages carried by trusted travellers. Most of the time, the archive lives in the mind. There are also households formed under conditions of coercion that leave deep wounds. Enslaved women are vulnerable to sexual exploitation by white men, whether owners, sons, overseers, or neighbours. Colonial records often hide this behind silence, euphemism, or hypocrisy. But the threat is real and pervasive. Families must navigate the consequences in private. Carrying pain the law has no interest in naming. A child born from such violence enters a world already twisted by power. The emotional complexity of these households is immense, and much of it remains only partially visible, because those who suffered it were rarely allowed to record their own account in safety. Religious practice can offer families a language for endurance. Evening prayers may gather a few voices together. A parent may speak of a God who sees hidden grief, or of ancestors who remain close in ways no sail can break. Some households blend Christian verses with older spiritual instincts, creating rituals of protection around sleep, sickness, childbirth, or mourning. A bit of cloth tied a certain way, a whispered phrase over a child, a careful respect for dreams, a warning not to disturb certain places after dark. These things can carry worlds within them. To the outside eye they may look like habit. To the family they are structure, comfort, and memory. A curious detail appears in several descriptions of enslaved communities from the broader Atlantic world. Observers often remark on the strength of attachment between parents and children then seem surprised by it, as though bondage ought to cancel human feeling. The surprise reveals more about the observer than the family. Of course, people loved their children. Of course, they grieved. Of course, they planned, worried, disciplined, laughed, and hoped. Oppression does not flatten emotion. It usually sharpens it. When sickness enters the cabin, family labour grows even more intense. Someone must sit through the night with a feverish child. Someone must fetch herbs, cool water, or help from a healer if one is trusted nearby. Grandmothers and experienced mothers often know remedies drawn from African traditions, native knowledge, colonial improvisation, or all three mixed together: garlic, roots, teas, poultices, steam, prayer, touch, patience. Not every illness yields, but care itself matters. In a society built on extraction, caring for the sick becomes a quiet declaration that a person is more than labour value. Mourning, when it comes, leaves its own imprint on family life. Death rates are harsh in many places, especially for infants and children, but also for adults worn down by work, disease, and inadequate diet. Funerary customs vary by region and community. Some mourn with hymn, some with whispered remembrance, some with gestures too subtle for outsiders to interpret. There may be a gathering by lamplight, a shared meal if food can be spared, a careful laying out of the body, a spoken hope that the dead remain known. Grief under slavery has little leisure. The next day still demands work. That does not make the grief smaller, it makes it lonelier. And yet, as the fire burns low and the night cools the walls, you sense that family remains one of the strongest acts of resistance in this world. Not resistance in the dramatic sense of a trumpet blast or sudden uprising, but in the steady refusal to let the market define every bond. A mother holding a child close after a frightening day, a father teaching a song under his breath, a grandmother telling a name so it will not disappear, a sister sharing food with a brother, a couple sitting shoulder to shoulder in the dark, saying little, because words are not always necessary when presence itself is precious. In these acts, hidden lives become full lives, threatened, exhausted, precarious, yes, but still human in every way that matters most. Morning comes quietly here, not with drama, but with the familiar discomfort of waking on something too thin. The first thing you notice is touch. Rough boards under a pallet, a blanket with more holes than warmth, a shirt stiff from old sweat and repeated mending. The second thing is smell. Smoke sleeping in the rafters, damp earth under the floor, yesterday's ashes, cornmeal, wet wool, human bodies sharing too little space. This is the material side of survival in the early 1700s, and it rarely appears in the grand portraits people like to hang in their minds. History loves powdered wigs. It is less eager to discuss the itch of coarse linen. For enslaved black Americans, daily life is shaped not only by labour and fear, but by the plain question of what covers the body, what fills the stomach, and what stands between a person and the weather. These things are never minor. Food, clothing, and shelter determine health, strength, morale, and the narrow margin between bearing up and collapsing. Owners often treat them as costs to be minimised. Enslaved people treat them as problems to be solved with skill, exchange, memory, and stubborn intelligence. Start with clothing, because the body meets the world through it every hour. Plantation issue in many colonies is basic and mean. Men may receive coarse linen shirts, woolen jackets for colder months, simple breeches, stockings if the owner is feeling almost festive, and shoes that wear out long before the year does. Women may be given shifts, petticoats, gowns of rough cloth, aprons, head wraps, and sometimes outer garments too thin for the season they are meant to survive. Children often receive even less, especially when very young. In warm months, some run half-clothed or nearly unclothed by necessity, not by comfort. Colonial society had a remarkable talent for calling itself civilized while dressing children in neglect. The fabric itself matters. Coarse linen scratches, wool traps heat, pricks the skin, and grows heavy when damp. Seams rub at the shoulder and underarm. Ill-fitted shoes raise blisters, then split, then become little more than leather suggestions tied around aching feet. When shoes fail entirely, the ground becomes part of the punishment. Frozen soil in winter, thorny paths in summer, mud that sucks at the ankles, pebbles that bruise, splinters in yards and workspaces. You can almost feel the body learning to move differently, carefully, economically, because every step asks a price. Yet clothing also becomes a field of ingenuity. Enslaved women and men mend constantly. Tears are patched with scraps. Worn cuffs are turned, seams are tightened. A garment too damaged for one use becomes cloth for another. Head wraps may be arranged with care and style, balancing practicality with beauty. A kerchief can keep sweat from the face, protect hair, and still carry individual taste in the choice of knot or fold. Even in deprivation, people insist on some form of presentation. Not vanity exactly. Personhood. There is a difference, and it matters. In some places, people supplement plantation issue through trade, theft, gifts, or skilled labour performed during rare spare hours. A woman who can sew well may alter garments for others. A man who fishes or traps successfully may barter for cloth. Urban workers sometimes access cast-off items from wealthier households, though cast-off is not the same as generous. It simply means someone else wore the comfort out first. Still, a better shirt is a better shirt. Survival has no obligation to be proud. Weather presses hard on this entire question. Summer heat makes every layer feel insulting. Sweat runs down the back and soaks waistbands. Linen clings. Headcloths grow damp. Mosquitoes find every opening. In winter, the cold enters through sleeves and necklines as floor cracks, and bad shoes with almost scholarly determination. If you sleep near a fire, one side of the body warms while the other stays cold. If you sleep far from it, all of you complains. Rain adds another misery. Wet clothing may stay wet for hours or days, depending on the work and the chance to dry it. The smell of damp wool and wood smoke settles into everything. Now look at food, and with it the daily mathematics of hunger. Rations vary by colony, crop, owner, and region. But they often centre on what is cheap, filling, and easy to store. Cornmeal appears again and again, so do salt pork, dried fish, rice in some areas, peas, beans, molasses, and occasionally flour. Garden produce may supplement these basics where garden plots are allowed or seized in practice through custom. Greens, yams, squash, onions, okra, and beans can transform a monotonous diet into something with flavour and nutritional sense. Food is one of the clearest places where African knowledge survives and reshapes colonial life. Cooking methods matter as much as ingredients. Boiling, stewing, roasting in embers, baking in simple ovens, pounding grains, seasoning with whatever herbs are available. These are not random habits. They are techniques carried, adapted, and refined. A pot of food can hold memory. One person remembers a way of seasoning fish. Another knows how to cook greens down until they soften and deepen. Someone else understands which local plant can be added without harm and which should be left strictly alone unless you are tired of existing. Culinary knowledge travels quietly, and it travels well. Hunger, though, is rarely far away. Rations may be too small, spoiled, or unevenly distributed. Workers doing hard labour need far more than many owners provide. Children may be given less than growing bodies require. Illness worsens everything. A person weakened by fever or injury cannot work effectively, and a person forced to work while weakened burns through meagre food even faster. The body becomes a ledger of shortages, hollow cheeks, slower movement, dizziness in the afternoon, that sharp, irritable exhaustion known to anyone who's gone too long on too little. Except here, it is not a missed lunch, it is a structure. So people improvise. They fish in creeks, they trap small animal, they gather nuts, berries, greens, and wild plants when geography and opportunity permit. They keep chickens if allowed, or at times, despite not being properly allowed in the way colonial life often pretends to enforce every rule equally, gardens become precious. A small patch behind a cabin or at the edge of a settlement can produce more than food. It can produce autonomy, however narrow. Tending your own beans, peppers, or greens means that for a few moments the labour serves your stomach, not someone else's profit. That is no small pleasure. A quirky detail from the period appears in planter complaints about stolen poultry, missing melons, or suspiciously reduced smokehouse stores. The tone is often outraged, as though the true scandal is not chronic underfeeding, but the mysterious disappearance of one very handsome chicken. One can picture the chicken in question, noble, wrongly admired, destined, perhaps, for a stew with excellent seasoning. Such records unintentionally reveal how common food acquisition outside official rations could be. When the system fails to feed people, people get resourceful. Meals themselves carry social meaning. A shared pot in the evening gathers family or neighbours close. Someone stirs while someone else talks. Children wait impatiently, then burn their mouths because patience is apparently a trait scheduled for later development. Adults portion carefully, making sure the youngest and weakest are fed, bowls are passed, crusts are saved, bones become broth if there is any sense in the camp, and there usually is. The smell of food cooking can lift a whole mood. Wood smoke, onion, fat, herbs, corn, fish, all mixing in the dusk. It says that after the day has taken so much, there is still something to sit around together. Shelter is the next great matter. On plantations and farms, housing for enslaved people ranges widely, but it is often cramped, poorly built, and plainly designed for economy rather than comfort. Cabins may be made of logs, rough planks, or wattle and daub in some regions. Roofs may be shingled, thatched, or patched with whatever materials are at hand. Floors can be dirt or simple boards. Windows, if present, are small and few. Some structures hold one family, others crowd several together. In certain urban settings, enslaved workers sleep in garrets, kitchens, lofts, passage corners, back rooms, cellars, or outbuildings close to the main house. Privacy is a rare luxury. Step inside one of these dwellings and you learn the room through your senses. Smoke lingers because chimneys draw badly or not enough. Air slips through the walls in winter. Summer heat gathers and sits heavily under the roof. Insects make themselves unwelcome companions. A pallet may be stuffed with straw, corn husks, moss, or rags, all of which flatten over time and need replacing. A stool, a chest, a few pegs, perhaps a table if someone has managed it. Pots and bowls, a broom, maybe a gourd dipper, maybe a small object kept for spiritual comfort or family memory, hidden where careless eyes will not bother it. Sparse, yes. Empty, no. People make these spaces livable through effort owners rarely notice. Cracks are stuffed against wind. Floors are swept. Bedding is aired when weather permits. Walls may hold bundles of herbs, bits of cloth, or utensils arranged with practical beauty. In some regions, cabins are whitewashed or repaired by the people living in them, which says a great deal about both neglect and resilience. Shelter is not merely received, it is maintained, improved, and interpreted. A badly built cabin can still become home because people insist on treating it as such, even when the structure itself resists the idea. Night sounds shape the experience of housing too. Boards creak as people settle. Someone coughs in the dark. Rain taps on the roof and then becomes a steady rush. Wind nudges smoke back down the chimney and fills the room with complaint. Frogs call from nearby water. Dogs bark at disturbances no one else cares to investigate. In crowded quarters, you hear breathing, murmured prayer, a baby turning restless, someone whispering across the room once the little ones are asleep. Community is audible in such places, so is the lack of solitude. Health rises and falls with these conditions. Poor shelter invites damp and cold. Poor clothing weakens resistance. Poor diet makes recovery harder. A fever in a cramped cabin can spread quickly. So can lice, coughs, stomach illness, and skin troubles. Yet within this hardship, people bring medical knowledge to bear. Herbal remedies, steam, poultices, warm broths, cooling cloths, patience, and close observation all become part of household care. An elder may know which bark helps settle the stomach, which leaves ease swelling, which roots must be used with great care. Historians still argue over the precise origins of some remedies found in colonial black communities, because African, native, and European traditions often mixed in practice. The blending itself is one of the most interesting facts. Town life adds different textures. An enslaved domestic worker sleeping above a kitchen may have slightly better walls but worse air. A cellar room may offer shelter from wind and a perfect environment for damp misery. A loft above stables comes with hay dust, horse smells, and a fine collection of noises all night long. Urban housing also increases the possibility of contact with free black people, sailors, servants, and other labourers, which can matter enormously for exchange networks. A better blanket, a little tobacco, a clay pot, a headscarf, a handful of dried peas. Such items do not sound like much until you lack them. Children experience all this differently, but not lightly. They feel the cold, the hunger, the shame of poor clothing, the comfort of a warm corner, the delight of an unexpectedly full bowl. They also learn quickly how household goods are valued. Do not waste soap. Fold cloth carefully. Keep the bowl from cracking. Move the stool away from the leak. Save string. Save fat. Save everything. In a deprived world, thrift becomes moral training and practical wisdom at once. What emerges from all of this is not just poverty, though there is plenty of that by design. It is a culture of making do without surrendering taste, care, and standards entirely. Food is seasoned because bland survival is still survival and need not be joyless. Clothes are mended neatly because being poor is not the same as being careless. Cabins are swept because dignity likes a clean floor even when the floor is rough. These choices do not erase the hardship. They reveal the people inside it. By evening, as smoke rises in blue threads and the last light settles on the yard, a settlement of cabins and cook fires can seem almost peaceful from a distance. That illusion should not fool you. Peace here is worked for. It is stitched from scraps, boiled from bones, patched against the wind, and guarded by people who have learned how much depends on ordinary things. A pair of shoes that lasts another month, a pot of greens stretched to feed 6, a roof that does not leak tonight, a blanket shared without complaint. In the hidden lives of early black Americans, material survival is never just background. It is the daily craft of staying human inside a system determined to economize your comfort down to the bone. Evening gathers slowly over the settlement, and with it comes a softer kind of attention. The heat loosens from the day. Smoke lifts from cook fires and pale ribbons. Somewhere in the dark, frogs begin their patient chorus, joined by crickets and the occasional restless dog. The smell of ash, damp grass, and simmering food hangs close to the ground. This is the hour when many things become easier to hide. A glance, a phrase, a tune carried under the breath. In the early 1700s, faith often lives in such hours, not always in churches with straight-backed pews and polished prayers, but in quieter places where the soul can stretch without asking permission. For black Americans under slavery, spiritual life is never one single system. It is layered, adaptive, and deeply personal, while also communal. Some arrive from Africa with rich religious traditions already shaping how they understand life, death, illness, justice, kinship, and the unseen world. Some come from societies where ancestors remain active presences, where sacred objects carry force, where ritual specialists tend illness or misfortune, and where music, gesture, and repetition guide the heart toward meaning. Others encounter Christianity in the colonies through masters, missionaries, travelling preachers, or household prayer. The result is not a neat replacement of one faith by another. It is more like several streams meeting in the dark and continuing on together. You can feel this spiritual world first through sound. A woman hums while stirring a pot, and the tune carries more weight than the task itself. A man murmurs a phrase before sleep, low enough that only those nearest can hear. Somewhere a few voices rise together in a simple repeated line, not loud, not formal, but steady. Repetition matters. It soothes. It teaches. It binds people into one breathing rhythm. Songs are especially powerful because they can carry sorrow, memory, warning, and hope all at once. To an outsider, a song may sound plain. To those inside it, every line may have roots deeper than the words suggest. In many colonial settings, white owners are uncertain about the religious lives of enslaved people. Some are indifferent. Some actively encourage Christian instruction, hoping it will produce obedience, humility, and the sort of piety that does not ask inconvenient questions. Others worry that baptism might confuse the rules of slavery, at least morally, if not legally. Colonial lawmakers are often happy to solve that problem for them by making clear that Christian conversion does not change a person's status. Very thoughtful of them. Nothing calms the conscience of a slave society like a legal document explaining why decency need not interfere with profit. Yet once biblical language enters enslaved communities, it does not stay obediently in the shape slaveholders prefer. Stories of captivity, wandering, deliverance, judgment, suffering, and divine notice strike with unusual force. A person listening to the story of Israel in bondage does not require much imagination to find it relevant. A mother hearing that the last shall be first may take comfort in ways the planter never intended. A man forced to bow his head in household prayer may still inwardly address a God who sees through polished lies. Religion imposed from above can become, in practice, a secret grammar of endurance. At the same time, African spiritual memory remains alive in forms both visible and subtle. The honouring of ancestors may continue in habits of remembrance, in careful treatment of the dead, in spoken names, in the sense that the boundary between living and departed is thinner than colonists suppose. Protective objects, charms, bundles, and ritual gestures may be kept or adapted. Certain crossroads, thresholds, trees, water edges, or burial places may hold meaning not obvious to an outsider. Herbal knowledge often overlaps with spiritual knowledge, since healing in many traditions includes both physical remedy and attention to unseen forces, a root in the hand, a prayer over water, a whispered phrase at a doorway. These things can belong to a spiritual world the official record barely notices. You enter a cabin where an elder sits near the fire, speaking to a few younger listeners. Her voice is low, unhurried, and sure, she's not giving a sermon in the formal sense. She's telling how things work, which dreams should be remembered, which should be dismissed, why a child must not mock the dead, why some illnesses call for herbs and rest, while others seem to carry another kind of trouble with them. Her authority rests not on paper or office, but on years, memory, and the trust of those around her. Such figures are easy for written history to miss, because they rarely leave signatures. Yet they often hold communities together more effectively than any official minister. Prayer itself takes many forms. In some settings it resembles the Christianity taught by colonists, with folded hands, memorized verses, and appeals to the Lord for mercy, health, or daily bread. In others it includes movement, swaying, rhythmic response, or repeated sacred phrases that feel older than the colony. Sometimes prayer is silent because silence is safer. A person lying on a pallet after midnight may pray inwardly for strength, for a child's recovery, for absent kin, or for simple survival through another week. Other times prayer is shared, with several voices joining in the dark while one leads. The leader may not read a single word, yet the cadence, authority, and emotional precision of the prayer can quiet a whole room. Water often holds special meaning in spiritual life across the Atlantic world, and not only for obvious practical reasons. Rivers, rain, washing, tears, and the sea itself all carry symbolic force. For people taken across the ocean in trauma, water can represent terror, rupture, and death, but also cleansing, passage, and the possibility of transformation. Christian baptism enters this older symbolic terrain and does not erase it. Historians still argue over how directly some African water belief survived in particular colonies, because the evidence is scattered and often filtered through hostile observers. But the deep spiritual charge attached to water appears again and again in ways too persistent to dismiss. Night gatherings, when they can occur, become important spaces for communal faith. These may be small and cautious, nothing like a public revival in a later century, but a few people gathering to sing, pray, or share warnings can create profound emotional shelter. The atmosphere of such a meeting is hard to overstate. Firelight flickers on faces, shadows shift on the wall. A baby sleeps through half of it, then startles awake when a voice rises. The air smells of smoke, skin, herbs, and packed earth. Outside, the colony continues with all its cruelty and self-importance. Inside, for a little while, people speak in a different register. They acknowledge grief directly. They ask for help from beyond the reach of masters. They remind one another that suffering is not the only truth available. Funerary customs reveal even more about hidden faith. Death is common enough in the early colonies to shape daily thought. But among enslaved people, the rituals of mourning can become especially meaningful. A body may be washed with care. A few words may be spoken over it. Perhaps Christian, perhaps older in tone, perhaps mixed. Songs may be sung. Personal objects may matter. The direction a body faces, the way the grave is marked, or the conduct expected from mourners may preserve habits not easily legible to white witnesses. Some colonists observe these practices and shrug. Others become suspicious, alarmed by anything they do not fully understand. Suspicion is, after all, one of the colony's favourite hobbies. Children absorb spiritual life not through lectures alone, but through atmosphere. They learn which names are spoken with reverence. They hear adults fall suddenly quiet when discussing certain matters after dark. They watch a grandmother touch a child's forehead and mutter words too soft to catch. They see someone leave a small token in a place that matters. They listen to Bible stories and older tales side by side, not as contradictions, but as different ways of naming a world full of danger and meaning. The result is a spiritual education rooted in both memory and necessity. There is also humour in this world, which is easy to overlook if you imagine faith only a solemnity. People tease one another about bad dreams, suspicious omens, or someone who claims special powers and then cannot even predict tomorrow's weather. Dry humour survives everywhere human beings survive. An elder may warn a child not to invite trouble from the unseen, then add a remark about that child already causing enough trouble among the visible. Laughter in such moments does not weaken belief, it makes it livable. Some white ministers record frustration that enslaved people seem attentive to preaching, yet continue practices the ministers classify as superstition. The complaint is revealing. It assumes religion must arrive in clean colonial packaging or not count at all. In reality, most people everywhere blend traditions far more than formal theology likes to admit. Colonial black spirituality is especially creative in this respect. A psalm may be recited over the sick, alongside an herb bundle placed under the pillow. A Christian prayer may be offered before a burial shaped by older assumptions about the journey of the dead. This is not confusion. It is adaptation with purpose. Spiritual authority can also offer a measure of social authority within the community. A person known for wisdom, healing, dream interpretation, or powerful prayer may become someone others seek out in crisis. That role carries responsibility. It may also attract danger if owners fear gatherings, healing work, or influence beyond their control. Still, communities continue to produce such figures because need continues to produce them. Where suffering is systematic, people will always look for those who can name it, soothe it, or stand against it in some symbolic form. The natural world enters this faith constantly. The cry of night birds, the smell of approaching rain, the behaviour of animals, the shape of the moon, the timing of tides. In many African traditions, nature is not mute background but active sign. Colonial life reinforces this attentiveness because survival depends on reading land and weather accurately. Spiritual and practical perception often overlap. A storm may be both weather and message. A dream before a journey may feel worth heeding. A place in the woods may seem better left undisturbed. To rationalist modern ears, perhaps this sounds mysterious. To people living close to uncertainty, it sounds sensible. There are also moments when Christianity gives enslaved people a direct language for moral criticism, even if voiced carefully. A master who prays publicly and acts cruelly invites judgment, whether spoken aloud or not. A mistress who recites scripture while starving workers becomes a lesson in hypocrisy sharper than any sermon. Enslaved listeners do not fail to notice the gap between professed belief and daily conduct. Religion sharpens the contrast. If all souls matter before God, then colonial hierarchy begins to look less like order and more like a very elaborate sin. At times, faith helps people endure what cannot be changed quickly. At other times, it quietly supports resistance by preserving dignity, hope, and the conviction that the visible world is not the whole world. That conviction is powerful. A person convinced that justice exists beyond the planter's porch may walk differently, think differently, and suffer differently than one who believes power is final. Spiritual life does not erase pain. It changes its shape. It gives pain witnesses, language, ritual, and sometimes a horizon beyond immediate defeat. As the hour grows later, voices soften. A final prayer drifts upward with the smoke. Someone settles a child back onto a pallet. Someone else tucks an herb bundle into a roof beam or beneath cloth near the bed. Outside, the night air cools the skin and smells faintly of wet leaves and river mud. The cabins go quieter, though not fully still. Faith remains in the room after the speaking ends. It lingers in the calm that follows shared song, in the courage borrowed for another dawn, in the old words and newer words resting side by side without complaint, beneath the surface of colonial religion, beneath the rules and sermons and legal assurances that ownership can coexist with virtue. Another spiritual world continues to breathe, patient, adaptive, deeply human, and very much alive. The day can feel most dangerous when nothing dramatic is happening. That is the strange truth of life under constant control. Not every hour brings an open threat, yet threat settles everywhere like humidity. It sits in the yard, in the kitchen, in the field path, in the stable, in the doorway where someone pauses a second too long before speaking. Morning light falls across the plantation with a kind of innocent beauty, touching fence rails, smoke from the cook fires, dew on the weeds, and the side of the main house glowing pale gold. The scene looks calm enough to paint. Then a horse snorts, a door opens sharply, and every body nearby adjusts at once. Fear does not always scream. Often it simply tightens. For Black Americans in the early 1700s, punishment is not only an event, it is a governing atmosphere. Violence may be physical, of course, and often is, But its power also lies in anticipation. A person learns to listen for tone before words. The speed of approaching footsteps matters. The sound of tack on a horse. The slam of a gate. The sudden silence of other workers when someone with authority appears. You begin to understand how much of the day can be spent reading danger before danger fully shows itself. The colony gives punishment many justifications, none of them noble. Laziness, insolence, theft, disorder, backtalk, slowness, negligence, leaving without permission, gathering improperly, carrying an object judged suspicious, speaking too boldly, looking too long, not moving quickly enough, moving too quickly and appearing evasive. These can all become excuses. The rules are broad because broad rules serve power well. If almost anything can be named disobedience, then everyone lives one accusation away from harm. Uncertainty becomes part of the discipline. You feel this first in posture. Workers keep their faces arranged with care, eyes lower when needed, but not so low as to appear sly. Hands keep moving, voices stay measured. There is an art to seeming neither too cheerful nor too slow, neither too familiar nor too distant. It is exhausting. Modern people sometimes imagine courage only in bold gestures. But there is courage too in the daily discipline of navigating a dangerous person's moods without losing your mind. Surviving bad power requires observation so fine it almost becomes a second sense. On many plantations and farms, overseers or drivers enforce the labour pace and the owner's will. An overseer may be hired, which can make him eager to prove usefulness through severity. A driver may be an enslaved man placed in a supervisory role over others, carrying heavy moral strain along with limited authority. These arrangements vary, but the pressure they create is constant. Someone is always watching, or seems to be, even when no one visible stands nearby. Habits of surveillance linger in the body. Shoulders stay tight, conversation narrows. A person feels seen before they are seen. Punishment can take physical forms ranging from whipping and beating to shackling, confinement, deprivation, or forced display before others. Colonial records are often brisk about such things, which somehow makes them worse. A line in an account book, a note in a planter's diary, a court record about correction, all reduce pain to management. There is no need to dwell on graphic detail to understand the terror. The point is clear enough. Violence is meant not only to hurt the individual, but to instruct the community. The punished body becomes a warning sign others are expected to read. Cruelty loves an audience, and yet the audience is never passive in the way slaveholders hope. People watching punishment are not merely learning fear, they are also studying the punisher, measuring the limits of his temper, remembering the circumstances, sharing judgments later in whispers, and storing the incident in a growing internal map of danger. Communities accumulate these maps, which offences trigger which responses, which days are worse, which masters punish in private, which prefer spectacle, which can be appealed to, and which are beyond reason. Knowledge like this is not freedom, but it can preserve life. The law deepens the atmosphere by making blackness itself suspicious. In many colonies, enslaved people need passes or explicit permission to travel. Gatherings may be restricted. Weapons are forbidden. Testimony against whites can be blocked or sharply limited. Patrols, militias, and local authorities watch for movement after dark, for signs of conspiracy, for runaways, for theft, for any hint that the enslaved population might imagine itself entitled to ordinary human mobility. The law says, in effect, that a black person existing unmonitored is already close to a problem. It is an ugly foundation for a society, though the colony builds on it with remarkable enthusiasm. Children learned fear early, not in lectures, but in the way adults shorten a sentence when certain people approach, in the quick hand on a shoulder that says stop talking, in the hush that falls after a raised voice from the main house, in the sudden stillness when someone is accused. A child sees all this and absorbs the lesson long before anyone explains it plainly. Danger has sounds. Danger has faces. Danger can come because you did something, but also because someone powerful wishes to imagine that you did. That uncertainty enters childhood like smoke slipping under a door. Inside the house, punishment may wear a different face. A mistress can withhold food, sleep, clothing, or access to children. She can accuse a servant of carelessness or insolence based on little more than mood. Household workers live under the strain of proximity. Every dropped dish becomes potentially symbolic. Every misunderstood instruction may be treated as personal offence. A woman scrubbing floors must also scrub herself free of any expression that could be read as resentment, even when resentment would be the most natural thing in the world. Emotional discipline becomes as necessary as physical labour. In the fields, fear often moves with the work itself. A line of labourers bends and straightens under the eye of authority, and every delay becomes visible. Someone too sick to keep pace may still be forced onward. Someone grieving may receive no allowance for grief. Weather does not excuse quotas. Fever does not soften temper. The plantation expects production, as though the people producing it were made of rope and timber instead of nerves, blood and memory. A person who cannot meet demands may be judged lazy rather than exhausted. Power has always enjoyed confusing injury with failure. There are curious glimpses in colonial writings of owners complaining that workers become sullen, evasive, or strangely clumsy after punishment has been used. The complaint is almost funny in its blindness. Yes, quite. Beating people does appear to reduce cheerful efficiency. A revelation. These complaints reveal something important, though punishment does not create stable loyalty. It creates fear, resentment, caution, and often secret forms of withdrawal. A body may remain present while the spirit steps back several feet and watches from a safer place. Fear also attaches to accusation between enslaved people, because authority can exploit division. One person may be pressured to report on another. Rivalries, jealousies, or simple desperation can become dangerous when those in power reward information. This does not mean communities lack solidarity. It means solidarity exists under strain, always negotiating hunger, fatigue, and risk. Trust becomes precious because it cannot be assumed. A whispered confidence is an act of faith. A shared plan requires careful testing of character. Under such conditions, integrity is hard won. Night does not remove fear. It changes its texture. Darkness can offer cover, privacy, and the possibility of rest. But it also carries patrols, surprise inspections, anxiety about unauthorized gatherings, and the danger of being found where one is not supposed to be. A dog barking in the distance can freeze conversation instantly. Hoofbeats on a road after midnight tighten every chest within earshot. The smell of lantern oil, leather, and wet wool from a passing patrol can bring a whole room to silence. Even sleep may be shallow, because the body knows it can be summoned, searched, questioned, or broken from rest. Some punishments target not only behaviour but identity and dignity. Hair may be cut in humiliating ways. Clothing may be reduced or made deliberately degrading. A person may be forced into a public posture of submission. The message is meant to sink deeper than pain alone. It says you do not own your appearance, your time, your movement, your voice, or even the terms on which shame enters your life. Yet here too the system never fully succeeds. Humiliation imposed from outside is real, but it does not always become self-belief. People can be made to kneel without inwardly agreeing they deserve to kneel. Religious language sometimes gets pulled into punishment as well. Owners may speak of correction, discipline, order, sin, obedience, and divine hierarchy, wrapping brutality in a vocabulary of moral concern. It is a familiar trick. Harm becomes instruction. Domination becomes stewardship. Enslaved listeners are not fooled as often as masters imagine. when the same hand that opens a Bible also orders a beating? The contradiction glows brighter than the candlelight. Hypocrisy can be its own education. The fear of sale hovers here too, because punishment does not only mean immediate physical suffering, it can also mean banishment from familiar people and places. An owner angered by resistance, repeated running away, or perceived defiance may sell a person farther south, split a family, or threaten to do so as leverage. The mere possibility of sale disciplines entire communities. Home is fragile when another man can turn it into distance with a signature. That threat can hang over a household for months, sometimes years, never fully spoken and never fully absent. And still, even in the thick of fear, people develop methods of self-protection beyond the obvious. They warn one another when tempers are rising in the big house. They learn which routes avoid watchful eyes. They hide small treasured objects carefully. They teach children the difference between safe speech and dangerous speech. They watch over the sick so weakness is not misread as laziness if it can be helped. They comfort those who have suffered punishment, quietly restoring personhood where the system tried to strip it away. A bowl of broth, a hand on the shoulder, a place to sit in silence. Such gestures matter enormously in a world organized to wound. Scholars still debate how far fear alone could maintain slavery in particular regions, because coercion always operated alongside economic dependence, legal structure, racial ideology, and habitual routine. But no serious reading of the period can miss how central terror remained. Fear is woven into the laws, the work patterns, the architecture, and the daily etiquette of survival. It is not a side effect, it is one of the tools. By late evening, after the last orders have faded and the yard grows dim, the plantation may seem temporarily hushed. Smoke drifts low, insects sing, a baby turns in sleep. Someone coughs softly into cloth. The night air cools the skin and carries the smell of damp leaves from the tree line. Yet beneath this quiet lies a whole population measuring the next day before it arrives. Who is ill? Who is angry? Who was noticed? Who might be in danger? Fear sharpens listening, but it does not destroy thought. It does not erase judgment. It does not stop people from recognizing injustice with perfect clarity. In the hidden lives of early Black Americans, daily fear is real, heavy, and intimate. So is the steady, stubborn human work of living under it without surrendering entirely to its terms. By afternoon, the colony begins to reveal a different sort of energy. Beyond the fields and household yards, you hear hammering from a workshop, the scrape of a saw, the ring of metal struck hot, the splash of an oar against dark water. The air changes too. It smells less of turned soil and more of pine shavings, pitch, smoke, leather, horse sweat, and river mud warming in the sun. This is the working body of colonial America in another form, and it depends heavily on skilled black labour. Not only on strength, though there is plenty of that, but on memory, judgment, craft, and timing. The irony is almost too neat. A society determined to deny black intelligence keeps putting black intelligence at the centre of its economy. In the early 1700s, many enslaved black Americans labour not just as field hands or domestic servants, but as artisans, transport workers, cattle tenders, builders, ferrymen, sailors, coopers, blacksmiths, carpenters, sawyers, brickmakers, mill workers, and cooks whose knowledge goes far beyond boiling a pot. Colonial records sometimes call them skilled hands, which sounds useful and respectable until you remember the hands belong to people denied ownership of their own labour. Skill raises value in the market, but it does not reliably raise freedom. Often it simply raises expectations. You step into a blacksmith space first, because the forge announces itself before you enter. Heat pushes out through the open doorway. The room smells of charcoal, iron, sweat, and burned scale. Sparks leap in brief orange arcs. Each hammer blow lands with a clean, forceful ring that seems to vibrate through the chest as much as the ear. An enslaved smith stands at the anvil, shaping metal with swift, exact movements. This is not mindless work. Iron must be heated to the right colour, struck in the right sequence, cooled with judgment, and turned toward its purpose with practised vision. Hinges, nails, tools, chains, wagon parts, horse fittings. Even delicate household items can emerge from such a shop. A poor smith wastes metal. A good one keeps the colony moving. Carpentry offers another world of expertise, in settlements where buildings rise quickly and weather destroys the careless. A carpenter's knowledge matters enormously. Enslaved carpenters frame houses, fit doors, repair roofs, shape beams, make tables, build storage chests, fashion shutters, and construct the practical skeleton of colonial life. The scent of fresh-cut timber follows them. Pine resin sticks to the fingers. Sawdust clings to sleeves and hair. A skilled carpenter reads wood grain almost the way another person reads mood. He knows which board will split, which beam will hold, which joint needs patience rather than force. You can feel the smooth, worn handle of his plane, the splinter risk of hurried work, the precise drag of blade against wood. Craft lives in the hands, yes, but also in the eye. Brickmaking and masonry demand their own hard intelligence. Clay must be dug, mixed, shaped, dried, fired, and stacked. Mortise must be judged by texture and weather. Walls must rise true, not charmingly crooked in the way tourists later pretend to adore. An enslaved brickmaker or mason helps create churches, warehouses, chimneys, kitchens, ovens, estate walls, and townhouses that may stand for generations while his own name disappears from the record. This happens often in colonial history. A building remains. The builder is blurred. Prestige loves selective memory. Waterwork forms an entire world in coastal and river colonies. Boatmen, ferrymen, fishermen, dock workers, and sailors move goods and people through landscapes where rivers are roads and tides keep the real schedule. In places such as South Carolina, Virginia, and the Chesapeake more broadly, enslaved men often become expert handlers of boats because plantation trade depends on them. They pole flatboats through shallow channels, row small craft across creeks, load tobacco hogsheads, ferry passengers, and read currents with sharp attention. River air smells of reeds, fish, mud, and tar. Oars blister the hands. Sunlight flashes on ripples so brightly it almost hurts. A good boatman learns wind, current, weather, and human impatience in equal measure. This work can create unusual mobility, not freedom, certainly, but movement beyond the immediate plantation. A boatman hears news from other estates, towns, taverns, docks, and river landings. He learns who is buying land, whose crop failed, which road washed out, which patrol has become troublesome, and where kin may have been sent. Information travels with cargo. So does possibility. Colonial authorities know this and often grow nervous about black movement on water, with reason. A person who knows the channels also knows routes beyond ordinary supervision. Cooks belong in this skilled world too, though colonial society often disguises their mastery as mere service. A truly capable cook in the early 1700s does not simply follow instructions from a tidy recipe card, because tidy recipe cards are not exactly covering the colonies in abundance. A cook manages uncertain supplies, variable fires, multiple pots, changing demands, spoiled ingredients, butchered animals arriving at awkward stages, and households that expect dinner to appear as though by divine favour. Enslaved cooks in great houses, taverns, and urban homes often blend African techniques, local ingredients, and European tastes into dishes that become central to regional food culture. Their influence is vast and largely unpaid, which seems very much in character for the age. Livestock work adds another layer: herdsmen, stable workers, drovers, and dairymen handle animals that are expensive, temperamental, and not especially impressed by social hierarchy. Cows kick, horses shy, pigs escape with suspicious confidence. A skilled worker knows how to calm, guide, feed, clean, breed, and judge animals by touch, smell, and behaviour. He can hear lameness in a horse's gait, notice illness in a cow's eye, or sense from a fence line where trouble will begin. The colony values these abilities greatly while pretending they require little thought. It is an old habit. Call expertise instinct, then avoid respecting the expert. Urban trades create particularly interesting spaces. In towns, enslaved artisans may be hired out by their owners to workshops, merchants, shipyards, bakeries, rope walks, or building projects. Hiring out can place a skilled worker in more varied settings, where he or she deals with free labourers, customers, apprentices, sailors, and officials. Sometimes the worker receives a tiny portion of wages or is allowed to keep tips or market earnings after meeting an owner's demands. Sometimes not. The arrangement can create narrow chances to build networks, save small sums, acquire clothing, or exchange news. It can also increase surveillance, risk, and exhaustion, because every extra skill becomes another opportunity for exploitation. You begin to notice that skill can change status within the enslaved community too. A healer, smith, carpenter, experienced boatman, or renowned cook often commands respect because others depend on that knowledge. A person who can repair tools, mend a roof, set a bone, deliver a child safely, or navigate a difficult inlet has practical importance that no legal code can erase. Such people become nodes of trust and exchange. They are asked for help, consulted in trouble, and often remembered more vividly than the formal records would suggest. A curious detail slips out of some advertisements for runaway slaves from the period. Owners describe fugitives as highly intelligent, excellent at several trades, fluent in more than one language, capable of forging passes, or likely to seek work under false pretenses because they are so competent. One can almost hear the injured astonishment. The notice attempts to recover property and accidentally publishes a recommendation letter. It also reveals why skilled workers were both valuable and feared. The more capable a person was, the harder he could be to confine completely. Skill sometimes provides modest bargaining room. A master may hesitate before severely punishing a blacksmith whose labour is essential, or selling a carpenter whose replacement would be costly. But this protection is uneven and fragile. Value can invite restraint one day, and harsher exploitation the next. A talented worker may be driven harder, hired out farther, or watched more closely because his labour generates income. Historians still argue over whether skilled status consistently improved living conditions for enslaved workers in particular colonies. The answer seems to be not consistently enough to trust. Skill could soften some edges while sharpening others. The sensory world of workshops also differs from plantation labour in ways that shape daily experience. A sawpit smells of green timber and sweat. A tannery smells so fierce it could drive philosophical reflection clean out of a man. A rope walk carries hemp dust and repetitive motion. A cooper's yard rings with the measured tap of staves and hoops coming together into barrels that will carry flour, fish, tobacco, or rum across the Atlantic. A mill hums with grain dust, turning wheels, and the steady threat of crushed fingers if attention slips. Colonial economies are noisy, physical, and profoundly dependent on practice coordination. Black labour is inside all of it. Women's skilled work deserves careful notice too, because it often hides behind familiar labels. An enslaved woman called washerwoman, cook, nurse, or seamstress may possess extensive technical knowledge. She understands stains, fibres, temperatures, and timing. She knows how to cut cloth economically, fit garments to varied bodies, preserve food, manage dairy, prepare medicines, deliver infants, and maintain entire domestic systems under pressure. Some women sell produce or poultry or cooked goods in local markets when allowed, using sharp commercial judgment. Others become known for basketry, spinning, dyeing, or herbal healing. Colonial men often write about such labour as if it naturally happens whenever a woman enters a room. It does not. It is learned, refined, and laborious. Trade also creates paths for cultural influence. Foodways are one obvious example. Agricultural knowledge is another. Building techniques, boat handling, music carried through work rhythms, healing practices, and market habits all move through enslaved communities into the broader colonial world. White colonists often adopt what is useful without acknowledging where it came from. A region becomes known for its rice wealth, its cooking style, its boat culture, its skilled craftsmanship, while the black hands and minds behind those things remain half hidden. Influence without credit is one of the signature arrangements of slavery. There is also a psychological dimension to skilled labour. Making something well can preserve a sense of self that domination tries hard to flatten. The shaped board fits cleanly. The nail holds. The loaf rises properly. The boat lands true at the dock. The child's fever eases after the right remedy. These outcomes matter. They say you still possess mastery in a world built to deny it. Work under slavery is never romantic, and skill does not make exploitation noble, but competence can offer moments of inward steadiness. You know what you're doing, even if the law pretends you do not own the knowledge in your own head. By late day, workshops cool a little as shadows stretch across yards and roads. The forge dims. Tools are hung or hidden. Sawdust settles. River traffic thins into evening light. The smells of hot metal and fresh wood fade into smoke and dust. Somewhere a cooper checks the last hoop on a barrel. Somewhere a cook tastes a pot before the household meal. Somewhere a boatman ties off his craft and watches the water darken by the bank. The colony around them congratulates itself on industry, order, and material progress. Yet beneath every polished claim stands the quiet truth that skilled black Americans helped build, feed, carry, repair, and sustain that world at every level. Their labour was not marginal, it was structural. Their influence was not decorative, it was practical, daily, and immense, hidden, yes. But hidden mainly because the society benefiting from it preferred not to look too closely at whose hands were doing the clever work. Sometimes resistance begins so quietly that no one outside the quarters would call it resistance at all. A hoe pauses a fraction longer in the row. A message travels by memory rather than paper. A canoe slips into dark water after moonrise. A woman keeps her face perfectly calm while deciding exactly how much she will reveal and how much she will keep. In the early 1700s, black Americans living under slavery do not wait for some grand future moment to prove their humanity. They resist inside ordinary hours, inside hunger, inside fatigue, inside the narrow corridors left by power. The sound of it is rarely dramatic. More often, it is the rustle of leaves as someone takes the longer path, the murmur of a warning, the soft knock at a cabin door after dark. Colonial records tend to notice resistance only when it becomes expensive, public, or frightening to white people. A runaway notice, a court case, a rumour of conspiracy, a burned barn, a missing tool, a dead overseer, a rebellion spoken of with much trembling seriousness. But beneath these visible moments lies a whole landscape of refusal. To understand hidden lives, you have to look there too. Resistance is not only revolt, it is also the steady effort to keep some corner of life from being fully claimed by the system. One of the most common forms is simply controlling the pace and manner of work whenever possible. In fields, workshops, kitchens, and yards, enslaved people often know far more about the labour than those ordering it. That knowledge creates room, though usually small room, for adjustment. A task can be done less efficiently when the master is absent. A repair can take longer than necessary. A load can be packed in the order most convenient to the worker rather than the owner. A message can travel slowly. A tool can be misplaced for a while. None of this topples slavery or Gier, of course. But it pushes back against total control. And it reminds everyone involved that forced labour is never the same as willing labour. You can see how subtle this must be. Too much slowness invites punishment. Too little does nothing. So resistance often takes the form of exact calibration. A person learns how much can be withheld without immediate notice, how to appear busy while preserving energy, how to comply outwardly while internally deciding the true limits of obedience. This kind of judgment requires constant attention. It is not laziness. It is strategy practiced under threat. Theft belongs in this world too, though white records prefer to call everything theft that interrupts their comfort. Food taken from storehouses, cloth borrowed without permission, tools hidden, animals trapped on the edges of an estate. These acts can mean survival, revenge, or both. A hungry family does not necessarily share the planter's moral framework about a chicken that mysteriously becomes supper, nor should it. Property law has a peculiar habit of sounding less sacred when it protects a man who thinks he owns people. In many settlements, the line between pilfering and provisioning becomes extremely thin. Knowledge itself can be resistant. Enslaved people carry news, family connections, roots, herbal remedies, and practical information across plantations, towns, and river systems. This information moves through kitchens, ferries, markets, burial gatherings, churchyards, and shared labour. A person who knows which owner has died, which road is watched, which boatman can be trusted, where wild food grows, or where kin were sold, possesses more than gossip. They possess leverage. Colonial authority depends heavily on controlling movement and communication. Every quiet network that escapes full control weakens that ambition. Runaway acts are among the most visible forms of resistance. Though even here the reality is more varied than popular imagination likes to admit. Not every fugitive plans to reach some distant free haven and never return. Some flee briefly to escape punishment, seek kin, negotiate better treatment, or remind an owner that labour can disappear. Others attempt long-distance escapes through woods, swamps, river routes, ships, or complicated chains of human help. The smell of pine and wet earth, the sting of insects, the fear of dogs, the disorientation of moving by stars or memory. All these belong to the experience. Running away is not a romantic sprint toward liberty. It is cold calculation mixed with terror. Maroon communities, where runaways gather in remote swamps, forests, or borderlands, are especially fascinating in the broader Atlantic world. In the mainland British colonies during the early 1700s, such communities are harder to sustain than in some Caribbean or Latin American regions, but they do exist in certain forms and places. Swampy terrain, frontier zones, and poorly governed areas can provide temporary refuge. Historians still argue over the size, duration, and stability of specific maroon settlements in different colonies, because the evidence is scattered and authorities often describe them only when alarmed. But the pattern is clear enough. Given harsh rule and difficult landscapes, some people choose the landscape. Conspiracy and rebellion loom large in the white imagination of the period, sometimes accurately, sometimes wildly exaggerated. Slaveholding societies are haunted by the possibility that the people they dominate may someday object in organised fashion. A shocking thought, apparently. In the early 1700s, fears of uprising sharpen after events around the Atlantic world, and local plots or rumoured plots lead to brutal crackdowns. The 1739 Stono Rebellion in South Carolina, though later in the century, becomes one of the most famous examples from British mainland North America. But even before such major events, rumours circulate, meetings occur, weapons are discussed, and authorities remain nervous. Large-scale resistance is risky because surveillance is constant and reprisals are severe. Still, the fear it inspires in slaveholders reveals an important truth. They know domination rests on unstable ground. Women's resistance often appears in forms that records undervalue or misread. A woman may protect information, hide food, preserve kin ties, encourage a runaway, slow household service, feign misunderstanding, sabotage the emotional order of the house by refusing the intimacy expected of her, or use illness strategically when her body can bear no more. She may also resist through child-rearing, teaching language, memory, caution, and self-worth to the young. Colonial authorities are often more likely to notice male flight or public violence, but women's actions are woven deeply through the survival of families and the maintenance of community under pressure. The body can become a site of refusal as well. Illness may sometimes be exaggerated for rest or safety. Pregnancy may alter the terms of labour. Sexual coercion may be met with forms of resistance ranging from evasion to collective protection where possible. In some parts of the Atlantic world, planters obsessively fear poisoning, and sometimes with reason. Knowledge of herbs and substances gives enslaved healers and cooks unusual power, at least in the imagination of owners and occasionally in reality. White anxieties about poisoning tell you something important about the household world. Trust is never complete, and dependence runs both ways. Culture itself carries resistant force. Songs can hold hidden meanings or shared emotion beyond the owner's understanding. Stories preserve moral codes that do not match plantation logic. Naming practices protect identity. Religious gatherings cultivate hope, solidarity, and a sense that earthly power is limited. Humour matters too. Dry jokes about masters, whispered impressions of their habits, mockery traded in safe company. These things help puncture the false grandeur of authority. A man with a wig, a Bible, and a temper is still only a man. Laughter remembers that. You notice resistance most clearly in the woods at dusk. A narrow path slips between trees, soft underfoot with leaves and pine needles. The air smells of bark, water, and the green coolness that rises after heat. Here, away from the central yard, people can meet more freely for a little while. News is exchanged, plans are tested, comfort is offered. A young man considering flight asks about the next river crossing. An older woman names who can be trusted and who talks too much. Someone has heard of work on another plantation. Someone else has seen patrols on the main road. The conversation never sounds grand. That is part of its strength. Practical resistance begins in practical speech. There are also moments when resistance looks like maintaining standards the system tries to wear away. Keeping yourself clean when supplies are poor, dressing with care on a Sunday, saving a cherished name, insisting on proper burial, refusing inward belief in the owner's version of your inferiority. These acts do not stop punishment, but they stop something else from happening. They stop domination from becoming the whole truth about who you are. That is a profound victory, even if history books often prefer louder ones. A quirky detail from the records appears in runaway advertisements that warn readers the fugitive may pretend to be free, speak plausibly, write passes, change clothes, or head towards ships because he understands sailors and ports. There is almost a grudging admiration in some descriptions. Owners know that intelligence, adaptability, and social skill make resistance more dangerous. They often publish those qualities widely in trying to recapture someone, which is an awkward little tribute. Imagine putting a bounty on a man and accidentally informing the world that he is clever, persuasive, multilingual, and excellent with tools. Sabotage exists too, though it can be hard to distinguish in the sources from ordinary accidents in a rough working world. A fence left weak, a harness strap cut too close, a batch spoiled, a gate unsecured, a nail placed where damage will follow. Because so much colonial labour depends on fragile systems and exact timing, even small disruptions can matter, yet enslaved people must weigh the danger carefully. open damage may invite collective punishment. This is why resistance so often operates in partial shadows, where intent remains deniable and effects spread quietly. Children participate in this world in age-appropriate ways. They carry messages, keep watch, distract attention, remember routes, and learn when not to repeat what they have heard. They also absorb a moral education about resistance simply by watching adults navigate power with cunning rather than surrender. A child sees that obedience is sometimes performance, that truth has safe times and dangerous times, and that dignity may need camouflage. These are heavy lessons for the young, but colonial life offers few light ones. Not every act of resistance succeeds. Many end in capture, punishment, betrayal, or heartbreak. Plans fail. Paths are blocked. Trusted people talk under pressure. Weather turns. Boats are noticed. Dogs track well. Owners retaliate brutally. It is important not to romanticize this. Resistance often hurts. It asks courage from tired people. It can place entire communities at risk. Yet the failures do not erase the meaning of the attempts. On the contrary, they reveal how unwilling many enslaved people were to accept the terms imposed on them as final. By night, after the settlement has gone dim and the stars sharpen overhead, resistance continues in forms too quiet for any patrol to list properly. A mother teaches a child the names of absent kin so distance will not erase them. A man sharpens a tool with a purpose he does not announce. A woman tucks away food for someone who may need to travel. Two friends agree on what they will say if questioned. Someone studies the sky for weather. Someone studies a lock. Someone prays for courage and then prepares a route. These are not separate from history. They are history in its most intimate form. The hidden lives of early black Americans contain far more refusal than slave societies like to admit. Not because every person could resist in the same way, or at the same cost, but because the desire to protect self, kin, memory, and possibility kept generating new methods. Some were bold, some were quiet, some lasted an hour, some shaped generations. All of them remind you that slavery, for all its laws and violence, never succeeded in producing perfect submission. It created fear, suffering, and terrible loss. Yes, but under that weight, people still chose cunning, solidarity, endurance, escape, sabotage, prayer, laughter, and the stubborn maintenance of an inner life no master could fully map. By the late 1700s, and even long before then, the official record has already begun its quiet work of distortion. Ink dries on ledgers, court filings, wills, shipping lists, tax rolls, church books, and estate inventories. Names appear, vanish, reappear altered. Ages are guessed. Skills are noted when useful. Bodies are counted. Prices are entered. A child may be listed beside livestock, furniture, and kettles as though the categories sit together naturally. This is how a slave society remembers when it wishes not to remember too much. It records possession with care and personhood with reluctance. Yet when you look closely, the hidden lives of early black Americans still press up through the paper like roots through stone. You begin in an archive of sorts, though not the polished modern kind with soft lamps and climate control. Imagine chests of papers in a plantation office, a county clerk's room smelling of dust and ink, a merchant's account book warped by humidity, a parish register with cramped handwriting drifting across the page. These records were not made to honour the enslaved. Most were made to manage them. That is why reading them feels strange. You're always listening for the human voice inside a document designed to muffle it. A bill of sale may tell you almost nothing and almost everything at once. Male, about 25, good carpenter, woman, with child, boy, likely, girl, sound. The phrases are clipped, transactional, and chillingly efficient. Yet even in such hard language, traces appear. A carpenter means a man who learned measurements, wood grain, tools, and construction under pressure. A woman with child means a mother carrying life while the market eyes both bodies. A boy likely means uncertainty, maybe poor health, maybe youth, maybe the seller's evasiveness, maybe a clerk writing quickly on a hot day with no patience for precision. The humanity is not absent. It is trapped between the lines. Runaway advertisements are among the most revealing and uncomfortable sources from colonial America, because they try to reduce a fugitive to a set of identifying details and accidentally preserve individuality in the process. The ad may note scars, accents, missing teeth, family ties, clothing, trade skills, languages spoken, habits of movement, likely destinations, and even personality. A man may be described as intelligent, artful, and plausible in speech. A woman may be noted for carrying herself proudly, for being known in market circles, for attempting to pass as free, for seeking a husband on another estate. These notices were written to return people to bondage, yet they often read like fragments of stolen biography. Church records create another peculiar window. Baptisms, marriages, burials, attendance, and moral discipline all appear in uneven ways. A minister may take special pride in converting the enslaved and record their Christian names with great seriousness while knowing little of their private convictions. A burial entry may be the only surviving written trace that a person lived at all. Such brevity can feel almost unbearable. One line, perhaps, for an entire life of labour, love, hunger, craft, fear, and endurance. It makes you realise how much history depends on who held the pen, and how much vanished because the wrong people were denied one. Wills and probate inventories are especially strange documents to sit with at night. They reveal the cold administrative heart of slavery. Property is divided, fields are assigned, debts are settled, furniture, cattle, tools, silver, enslaved men, enslaved women, children, all listed in orderly sequence. Yet these same inventories can expose family ties owners pretended not to value. A woman and her children are grouped together. A skilled man is left to one heir and his wife to another, showing by accident what may soon be broken. A child appears with a name linked to an elder elsewhere in the estate papers, offering one small clue to kinship. Historians still argue over how confidently such links can be reconstructed in some cases, because names repeat and records are inconsistent. But the effort matters. It is one way of giving the dead back some of the relations that the market tried to strip away. There are silences too, and they speak loudly. The archive says little about what a mother whispered to her child at dusk, what joke passed among boatmen at the landing, what prayer was murmured over a fevered body, or how a cook felt while serving a family who praised liberty at dinner. You do not find the smell of wet wool in a court record. You do not find the warmth of a sleeping child leaning against an elder in an inventory. You do not find the private anger of a blacksmith in an account book that praises his output. This absence is part of the story. The hidden life is hidden not because it lacked depth, but because power documented only what served power. So how do those lives remain visible at all? They remain visible through fragments that, when handled carefully, begin to answer one another. A sale record meets a baptism entry. A runaway ad meets a plantation journal. A burial note meets an oral tradition preserved generations later. Archaeology meets memory. Material culture meets language. A broken bowl. A pipe stem. A cabin footprint. Beads. Buttons. Iron tools. Food. Remains. Grave patterns. All of these can speak when paper fails. The earth, unlike the clerk, sometimes keeps faith with ordinary people. Walk with your imagination now through an excavated cabin site. The walls are gone, but post holes show where they stood. Ash stains suggest the hearth. Bits of pottery lie in the soil beside animal bones, oyster shells, fish remains, corncob fragments, and nails bent by use. A blue bead appears, a brass button, a gaming piece or polished stone worn smooth by touch. None of these items announces a full story by itself. but together they begin to suggest choices, habits, trade, diet, adornment, repair, taste, and spiritual meaning. A cabin was not just a place where labourers collapsed. It was a lived space, arranged and rearranged by people with memories and preferences. Graves carry another difficult sort of evidence. Burial grounds associated with enslaved communities often lie apart from the grand churchyard or in sections long neglected by later generations. Yet when they are found and studied respectfully, they reveal much about care, belief, and continuity. The position of the body, the orientation of the grave, the presence or absence of markers, shells, ceramics, or personal items, all may suggest a blending of African traditions, Christian practice, local adaptation, and family devotion. Some details remain uncertain, and scholars rightly debate interpretation, but the emotional fact is unmistakable. People were loved enough to be buried with intention. Language also preserves hidden lives in surprising ways. Words, rhythms, naming habits, folk tales, songs, and turns of phrase travel across generations even when formal records do not. In some regions, traces of West and Central African languages survive in speech patterns, place names, and vocabulary tied to food, craft, landscape, or kinship. Folklore keeps lessons alive that archives ignore. A trickster tale may hold memory of surviving stronger forces through wit. A lullaby may carry a rhythm older than the colony. A cook-in term may preserve a whole route of exchange across the Atlantic. Culture is stubborn like that. It hides in plain sound. There is a temptation, when dealing with erased histories, to focus only on suffering because suffering leaves the clearest marks in the official record. But to remember early Black Americans truthfully, you must also remember capacity. They were agricultural experts, navigators, cooks, healers, mothers, carpenters, singers, blacksmiths, ferrymen, seamstresses, interpreters, herbalists, midwives, storytellers, and children with sharp eyes. They built knowledge networks. They cultivated gardens. They dressed carefully when possible. They formed attachments. They prayed. They grieved. They joked in low voices about ridiculous masters. They made things beautiful when beauty had no reason to appear. A particularly odd feature of colonial writing is how often white observers express surprise at black intelligence, emotional depth, artistry, or devotion, as if each encounter overturns a theory they are determined to keep despite mounting evidence. An enslaved carpenter proves remarkably capable. A woman nurse shows extraordinary tenderness. A cook displays refined taste. A boatman navigates expertly in difficult tide water. Again and again. The observer is startled. One wants to tell him gently to sit down and think harder. The surprise is not evidence about the enslaved. It is evidence about the observer's need for blindness. When descendants later search for their ancestors, these early records can feel both precious and brutal. A name found at last may appear in a sale ledger. A great-grandmother's line may surface first in the papers of the man who owned her family. To recover ancestry from such material requires patience, imagination, and often grief. Yet recovery matters because slavery aimed not only to exploit bodies, but to disorder memory. To trace a line back through the damage is to resist that design. It says this person was here. This life had shape. This family did not begin in a clerk's handwriting, even if that is where the surviving paper begins. Public memory has long preferred simpler stories. Colonial America as brave settlement, founding liberty, expanding trade, elegant houses, industrious planters, fine church steeples, busy ports. All of that can be shown in a pleasant painting. Less convenient is the truth that these worlds depended deeply on enslaved black labour from an early date, and that the human beings inside that labour system possessed full inner lives the society worked hard to obscure. To remember only the architecture and not the hands that raised it is not memory. It is curation in service of comfort. What survives most powerfully, in the end, is not only evidence of oppression but evidence of endurance with texture. A scar mentioned in a notice, a child named after an elder, a pot style carried across water, a work song's rhythm lingering in later music, a grave tended carefully, a route remembered, a family story told and retold until it outlasts the paper that ignored it. The hidden lives of early slaves remain difficult to see in full because no archive can fully restore what slavery tried to break. But difficulty is not the same as impossibility. The voices are faint, not gone, and when you listen long enough, the colony begins to sound different. The port no longer belongs only to merchants and captains. You hear the dock worker lifting barrels and the woman carrying produce to market. The plantation no longer belongs only to the planter's account book. You hear children in the yard, a smith at the forge, a whispered prayer in the cabin, a pot lid rattling over the fire. The churchyard no longer belongs only to the minister's hand. You sense mourners standing close in the dusk, remembering names. History widens. The hidden people move back into it. Now let the night soften around all of this. The papers close, the lamps dim. Outside, air cools over river water and low fields. Trees stand dark against a sky dusted with stars. Somewhere, very far in your mind, a cabin fire settles into embers with a faint red glow. Someone has finished the washing. Someone has banked the hearth. Someone has laid a sleeping child down gently and tucked the blanket close. The noise of the colony grows quiet at last. No commands now, no ledgers, no market voices, only crickets, distant frogs, the hush of leaves, and the slow breathing of people who carried entire worlds inside them while others refused to see. As you drift lower into rest, hold only this gentle truth. Those lives were never empty spaces in the record. They were full human lives, partly hidden, never absent. In the dark, names survive, in memory. Hands keep working, not in bondage now, but in dignity. A woman hums softly near a fading fire. A boat rocks at its mooring. Pine smoke thins into the night air. The earth keeps its secrets, but not forever. Little by little, the lost come nearer. Their footsteps soften on the path. Their voices no longer strain. The burden of the day slips away from their shoulders, and from yours as well. So you let the colony recede into stillness. The river darkens, the stars grow calm and distant, the cabins fade into shadow, then into quiet. What remains is warmth, breath, and the deep sense that even in the harshest worlds, human presence endures. You rest there for a moment in that softer understanding, while the night gathers everything gently in its care.